It's time for our weekly Global Quakes. And this week, we are going to look at whether Yellowstone National Park is waking up from its slumber. But first, let's start with our quote of the week. This one comes from Nikola Tesla, and it goes, "The day that competition ceases to exist is the day that progress ceases to exist." This is a topic that has been brought up by many viewers over the years, but it remains one of my favorites, because without competition there would be no improvement. I would even go so far as to say, if you don't have competition, you're probably not doing all that great. So thanks for the reminder, Nikola. Now let's move over to our first story of the week. Our first story is going to take us over to Japan, where we are in Hokkaido. Here we can see there was a pretty large earthquake that occurred. This one had a moment magnitude of 6.9. That makes it about a 7.1 on the Richter scale. The earthquake occurred just east of Raushitsu. You can see here near the coast, and the focus depth was pretty shallow at only 20 kilometers. There were no reports of any significant damage or injuries. However, some people did notice that their smartphones went off and they started to shake. So this was definitely felt by many people across the region. Now, before we move on to our next story, I do want to mention just how active the month of September has been. I mean, look at this map. We have so many different earthquakes ranging in size from 6.0 to 7.0 all around the world. It seems like hardly a week goes by without at least one earthquake above 7.0. Many of these have been foreshocks related to the swarm at the Yellowstone Caldera. Well, I guess I shouldn't say swarm yet. Let's get to our next story to find out why. Our next story is going to bring us back to the United States and Yellowstone National Park. This is something we've touched on a few times on the channel before, but I want to revisit it now because it seems like things are starting to ramp up once again. In the past week alone, there were more than 1,000 earthquakes recorded within the Yellowstone Supervolcano caldera. That's right, 1,000 earthquakes in less than a week. Now, to put that into perspective, last year between January and September, there were only 3,300 earthquakes recorded. So in other words, we may already be close to the yearly total for earthquakes at Yellowstone, and we still have 3 months left to go. Yellowstone supervolcano is a massive thing. It covers an area roughly the size of Los Angeles, and inside the caldera, there are 3 smaller calderas. They are Norris Middle and the Yellowstone Caldera. Most of the recent activity has been occurring in and around the northeast corner of the magma chamber. It seems to be focused in this general area. The largest earthquake during this most recent swarm was a 4.8 magnitude. The earthquakes were felt as far away as Idaho Falls, which is about 80 kilometers from Yellowstone. Luckily, no damage has been reported. Yellowstone is one of the most seismically active places on Earth. Since 1850, there have been about 20,000 earthquakes in the region, with 10,000 occurring just in the last 40 years. Experts say that having thousands of small earthquakes is normal for the area. These usually occur due to tectonic plate movement. The reason there are so many earthquakes in this area is due to the fact that we are literally sitting on top of the boundary between the North American and Pacific plates. The Pacific plate is slowly sliding underneath the North American plate. This process causes tremendous amounts of pressure to build up. Eventually, this pressure is released in the form of an earthquake. Now, what worries scientists is when there is a buildup of pressure that does not release in an earthquake. That's because what happens is the magma chamber begins to inflate. If this continues long enough, it could lead to a super eruption. Now, there is absolutely nothing new about this recent swarm of earthquakes. This is something that occurs on a regular basis. However, we are coming off 2 major events. So it's good to revisit the science behind Yellowstone just to make sure we understand what's happening. In August of 2021, there were 254 earthquakes recorded. This was a pretty big deal at the time because it was the largest swarm since the early 1980s. Then earlier this year, in the month of June, there were 3,000 earthquakes recorded. That is the highest monthly total since 1985. During this time, researchers actually noticed that the ground in the park began to bulge upwards by about 5 centimeters. Scientists believe that the molten rock below the surface may have been moving into the magma chamber. This caused the ground to rise. It also created enough pressure to cause all of these earthquakes. So I know the title of the video says, "Is Yellowstone waking up?" And that gets people asking if we should be worried. The answer is no. Even though the number of earthquakes has been rather high recently, it's not really anything out of the ordinary. Yellowstone has been very active for the past few years, and scientists have been watching it closely. Remember, Yellowstone has been dormant for about 70,000 years. However, it is considered active. The difference between active and dormant is that active volcanoes erupt on average every 500 years, whereas dormant volcanoes erupt on average every 10,000 years. So, even though we haven't had an eruption in 70,000 years, it's still considered active because the magma chamber is still very much active. So, is it time to pack up and leave Yellowstone? Absolutely not. Even if the earthquake swarm continues to grow, it's still nothing out of the ordinary. Just remember, the largest earthquake ever recorded was a 9.6 magnitude. The largest earthquake in the United States was the 1964 Great Alaska earthquake, and it had a magnitude of 9.2. The largest earthquake ever recorded at Yellowstone was a 7.3. So even if the earthquakes keep increasing in size, you still have a long way to go before you need to worry about a major event occurring. Now, I will say this though, even though it's nothing to worry about, I would still recommend avoiding Yellowstone for the time being. With all of these earthquakes occurring, the last thing you want is to be stuck there if something major were to happen. Thankfully, scientists have been monitoring the situation closely. They say that it's all part of the cycle. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. And now we'll move over to our final story of the week. Our final story is going to take us over to Turkey and then eventually over to Croatia. We have two separate events that occurred over the weekend. First, we'll start with the one in Turkey. A 5.9 magnitude earthquake struck the Kahramanmaraş province. This one had a depth of 7 kilometers. This is considered a shallow depth earthquake. This earthquake was preceded by a 4.4 magnitude foreshock. Luckily, there were no reports of any damage or injuries. The second earthquake occurred in Croatia. This one had a moment magnitude of 5.4. The earthquake occurred near the town of Glina. This one had a depth of 10 kilometers. Croatia is no stranger to earthquakes. They sit on the Adriatic microplate, which is surrounded by several different fault lines. In 2020, a 6.4 magnitude earthquake struck Zagreb, which is the capital city. This earthquake was one of the largest to hit the city in more than a century. So do you think Yellowstone is waking up? Let me know your thoughts down below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe for more earthquake updates every single week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.